Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in for our webinar dialogue. We're going to be talking about why human rights are so important, especially when we're thinking about small businesses and specifically kind of focusing on business owners, lifting up the community and their workers from a human rights lens. My name is Manpreet Delombarar. I am here as a facilitator with the Universal Human Rights Initiative. And I'm going to pass it on to my co-facilitator in a bit to introduce herself, as well as our panelists. We're going to share their experiences with being part of the small business community. But we're doing this as part of the National ACE webinar series to really bring more information around human rights and intergroup dialogue to the small business community, the Asian Pacific Islander small business community. And we do this work with the Universal Human Rights Initiative, which really focuses on, we're using social justice education and intergroup dialogue as a way to bring human rights education into the community. So we've got lots of different projects where we're partnering with the United Nations, we're partnering with local community organizations to provide education around human rights and social justice. So I'm excited to be here specifically to talk about human rights in businesses. I'll pass it on to Abigail Bryce, to introduce herself and our panelists for today.
Thank you, Manpreet. My name is Abigail Bryce, and I'm a content editor and dialogue facilitator for UHRI. And this is the second event in the AAPISTRONG National ACE programming that we are partnering with. So I'm really excited to be here today with Lynna and Danny. I'm going to do a land acknowledgement to acknowledge the land that our organization does work on. And then I will pass it to our panelists today to introduce themselves. And so let's just take a moment to reflect on the lands on which we reside and do our work. So today we find ourselves on the unceded Tongva, Tataviam, Chumash, Wappinger, Paugussett, Ohlone, Muwekma nations, and the confederated villages of Lichjan on whose ancestral lands. Like I said, we are doing this work for human rights. So we're coming from many places, and we want to acknowledge the ancestral homelands and traditional territories of Indigenous peoples who have been here since time immemorial, and recognize that we must continue to build our solidarity and kinship with Native peoples across the Americas and across the entire world. Land acknowledgements do not exist in past tense or historical context. So we know that colonialism is a current ongoing process. And it's one that we have to continuously interrupt. And we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation in this project, right? This ongoing process. So UHRI is based on the unceded territory of what is now called Los Angeles. And we honor and acknowledge the peoples whose land we are on. And we also acknowledge that this country would not exist if it wasn't for the enslaved labor of Black people. And so today we are also taking time to honor the legacy of the African diaspora and Black life, knowledge, and skills stolen due to violence and white supremacy. So while the movement for justice and liberation is ever present, and now we can really feel that we're witnessing the power of the people, there are still many that are being met with violence and even being killed. And a lot of that history is why we're here today, is why we're gathering and talking about business and human rights, which is a really important relationship to focus on in interrupting and acknowledging that history. So we still have seen so much of this, and it's affecting all of us. And collectively, our organization, UHRI, and all of our communities that are saying that police and white violence must end and that Black lives matter. So let's commit today, before we begin, to take what we learn in this session, in this webinar, and incorporate it into our lives and turn our words into action. So please join me in taking a moment to honor the land, life, and labor of the Indigenous and Black communities where you reside. Thank you. And so with that pause, with that breath, I will pass it to Lynna Doe to introduce herself. And then Lynna, if you want to pass it to Danny to introduce himself.
Of course. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lynna Doe. I am a board member for UHRI. Also, I am a small business owner adjacent. It's still my mother's business, but my sister and I are going to be inheriting it this next year. But we've been working in this business since we were in our late 20s. We own a interpretation, translation, referral service firm. So we provide contacts between agencies that need interpreters and translators to help limited English proficient individuals in our communities to navigate the systems that as English speakers, we navigate each day. Just our day-to-day healthcare, legal services, all that stuff that sometimes it's even difficult for English speakers to navigate. But we are the conduit and bridging the gap between limited English speakers and cultural differences. And we are cultural brokers. So human rights plays a huge role in what we do in services, human services. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to pass it to Danny.
Thank you. Hey, everyone. My name is Danny Park. Let's see. I run a market here in downtown Los Angeles in the Skid Row neighborhood called Skid Row People's Market. It's been in my family for 27 years now. 6 years I took it over, and which used to be called Best Market, which was more of a convenience store. So the work has been transitioning from what was more of a convenience store into a grocery shop, with the space and the scale that we can met with we're in the same location, so we do what we can in the scale. So I more say like a small scale full service grocery shop is how I explain it. And so we work it's a market. So we work around food, and really I kind of over the years look at it as public health. It's kind of what we work with. We work with the people, and when we talk about food and nutrition, health, social, mental, physical, looking at spiritual, all aspects. And yeah, that's kind of where I find myself today. And kind of I like art, poetry. I do some graphic design. I like to meditate. A little bit about myself personally, but so thank you for the invitation, and happy to be here today and learn.
Thank you so much, Danny and Lynna, for introducing yourselves and also sharing a little bit more about your family, your history behind the business that you run. And I love personally hearing about your personal hobbies and things that you value doing outside of being a business owner. So we're going to be hearing a lot more from Danny and Lynna today, but our goal for today is we want to contextualize human rights in the business practice. And we're going to be doing a lot of kind of sharing around the guiding principles on business and human rights that have been put forth. And we'll do this kind of using the intergroup dialogue model and framework, and having a dialogue with both Danny and Lynna, learning about their experiences. And we really encourage you to also take this information in and have these conversations in your own businesses to really try to figure out how can businesses impact human rights, right? And the communities that we exist in. And that's one of the goals of dialogue and intergroup dialogue specifically as we think about it. So this isn't just a time for us to do education. It's also a really important time for us to have a dialogue. And dialogue is a unique form of communication because it's collaborative and it's community focused. So our goal with dialogue is really to come to an agreement, using a collaborative effort coming to a place where we can build community rather than really coming from a place where we're trying to prove someone right and say the human rights case is the right way to go for businesses, which is what debate oftentimes might do. And it's also quite different from how we just think about having a discussion about certain topics, which can tend to be very neutral, maybe a little bit more academic. We're just sharing information rather than really bringing in those personal experiences, which we know are so key to how we live our lives every single day. So our goal is to share a little bit more about how we can use this collaborative effort using intergroup dialogue to create a community understanding around the business case for human rights. And one of the ways we do that is through just making sure that we're all on the same page about how we're communicating with each other and what kind of guidelines we're agreeing to as a community when we're having conversations about things that can be personal and have a community impact. So Abigail's going to share a little bit more about the community tool, the communication guidelines tool that we tend to use at UHRI to have these conversations.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess the question that comes out of, okay, so we talked about how dialogue differs. So what are the practical tools to bringing in personal experiences into the conversation? And to do that and to kind of promote that collaboration and consensus building, right, to ultimately build trust and make room for the building of really deep personal connections and relationships. We use this tool, Aspire. And so Aspire asks us to assume good intentions of one another. So we are asked to check prejudgments that we might have coming into a dialogue space, sometimes with strangers. And it also asks us to take accountability for negative impact. So we ask that if there is an impact, that we have a mechanism to address that, right? So ouch and oops is kind of our go-to straightforward way of taking accountability and recognizing that there was impact on somebody in the group. Sharing airtime is important, and getting in touch with how we communicate and what compels us to communicate. So we offer take space and make space as a way to kind of promote mindfulness around when and how much we engage. Practice active listening. So active listening is what we do not only with our ears or however we interpret language, it's how we listen with our bodies and how we listen with our mind, body, and soul, right? So it kind of takes the whole self to recognize the whole self that's being communicated. I statements are really important to intergroup dialogue and to these communication guidelines. We're speaking from our own experience, and it connects to the last point here, which is that everyone is an expert in their own experience. So, we can only speak from what we know, and in that way, we're kind of reducing the assumption making that we're doing. We're empowering ourselves with our own story, and we're making room for other stories. And confidentiality is really important, right? To creating a brave container where people feel safe enough to share their stories. So what happens in this room, you can take out the messages, which I'm sure there will be many, but names should stay in the container. And normally in a dialogue, we'll ask for additional changes from the group. If there are any, please feel free to put those in the chat, and we can verbalize those for everyone. So what are human rights? I kind of love that because human rights feel kind of elusive at times because they're so all-encompassing and they touch on like literally every aspect of our lives. But there's a real power in identifying and intentionally impacting human rights and in noticing the impact that we have on human rights. So I find that there's a power in speaking them into language and into action. And that way they don't get lost in kind of everyday discourse, and they don't lose their kind of inherent power, right? So we're all entitled to the same basic rights and freedoms, regardless of where we're from or who we are. These are rights that are not earned, right? We don't even necessarily deserve them. They're just inherent, right? So they can't be granted or revoked. There's no state or governing body that gives them or allows them. They're inalienable and they're universal. And we have kind of different categorizations of human rights. So there's economic, social, and cultural rights. So a lot of what we'll be talking about today falls into that category. So the example of the right to work in a safe environment, for a fair wage, or to take part in cultural life. And that's really key too in how we consider how businesses impact community building and do outreach to their communities. We also have civil and political rights, right? So the right to freedom from discrimination, the right to freely explore the kind of social and cultural aspects of our life. And oftentimes those are used as justification for actions like being fired from a job. So in a little bit, we'll also touch on the kind of business responsibility and due diligence towards supporting human rights. But for now, I think we want to turn to our panelists and see how human rights touch their businesses.
Yeah, so we'd love to hear from either Danny or Lynna. Feel free to jump in, and love to hear from both of you, but specifically around your businesses and maybe what challenges and stereotypes or norms have you run into with your businesses, and how do you solve them? And if you think about human rights issues, what would you say is the most pressing in your neighborhood and where you do your work, and how have you gotten involved?
I think, as you know, as a woman business owner, I think a lot of times that the issue that we face is that people don't take us seriously as a business, right? Because it's still a male-dominated world, and we get this all the time, that people try to call our office and say, "Can I speak to Mr. Lando?" That's my mother. And we'll say, it's a woman-owned business, so there is no Mr. Lando, unless you want to talk to my father, but he's not. Yeah, sometimes he goes by Mr. Lando, but that's not the owner. But people just naturally assume that all business owners have to be, a man. And my mother started this business 30 years ago, and she has dealt with all the challenges and stereotypes, the norms, and she's, the typical names have been called and all that stuff. And when right now we're located in Alameda, so we're in a business park. So we are, kind of isolated from, the community in a way. And that has its challenges, but it's also, I think it's a little bit more of a privileged thing that we're in a business park, and we, because most of our work is outside of the office anyways, and the contacts we have are from our subcontractors that work out in the field. But during COVID and during all this anti-API hate, we've had some issues, that some scares in this business park, where we have, been afraid, of being attacked or being broken into, because, we are an Asian company. And then also, the neighborhood that we're in is pretty much industrial, except for, one of the companies next door to us is a pharmacy that provides, lots of prescription drugs. And so, we've had incidents where people have come in our door looking for their prescriptions, and I'm not going to assume that there's an addiction or something, but that's a natural thing you go to, and it gets scary. So we used to keep our doors open. Now we lock them, and that is an issue in itself, where we as an agency that, has been built on community service and, providing, social services and assistance to individuals and not discriminating against them because they speak a different language or they're not able to speak English or whatever, it's been trying. And my mother is the most loving person and trusting person in the world. And to convince her that we have to lock our doors wasn't an easy task. But for a safety issue, it's, things you have to do to change to protect us. And, in the community in general, it's very challenging, with the API hate, and especially in Oakland, we hear business owners, especially small business owners that have to close their shop down, before it gets dark because number one, they get attacked just because. And number two, if you do keep yourself open beyond a certain hour, you're guaranteed to not have a business, right? Or even when you close down, so it's trying. So when you're, when you think about the community, you want to do good, but safety and the issues come first, right? You have to protect yourself before you can help your neighborhood, because if you're not around, how are you gonna work with your neighborhood? So
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Lynna. It sounds like even in the 30 years, there have been some ongoing challenges around stereotyping because of being a woman-owned business. And there's some more recent kind of changes you've had to make, especially your surrounding safety, due to kind of the challenges we're dealing with now. So I appreciate you painting that picture for us and sharing kind of what you all have been going through and doing. And I'd love for Danny to jump in here and share more from your experience, especially being in Los Angeles, and the flyers that you see on the screen are from Danny's shop. So just what are some of the challenges and things you've dealt with in your 28 years, 27 years in business, and especially the last 6 years that you've taken over, and also kind of the human rights issues in your neighborhood?
Yeah, just a little, I'll start with just building a little context. For those who don't know, like Skid Row, it's a predominantly Black, African-American neighborhood, working class neighborhood, extremely poor working class neighborhood. I think contrary to maybe kind of the image of Skid Row, the majority of folks are housed. And yeah, I know kind of the image of Skid Row, tents, encampments. I think the first word that comes to mind is homeless or houseless. And that's also part of it. And yeah, how I think it's important to say it's a historic Black neighborhood. There's folks and families, multi-generational families who lived here in this neighborhood. And so, and like Lynna, said, like the last part, if you're not around, how are you gonna help your community? And like, I think part of kind of how, just what informs us every day and how we've grown is really just being here every day, and learning and being and working and growing, being here with everyone. And so I guess, yeah, a little bit about the human rights, obviously like housing is kind of, when you think of homelessness, Skid Row is the thing that comes to mind. What also kind of what came to mind for me is the past several months with this heat wave, 90, almost 100 degrees, like, and so like without housing, I mean, when we're working around food, mental health, all this stuff, without the right type of like healthy, adequate housing, it's kind of all like interlinked. So yeah, when I see the word human rights, what comes to mind from a recent thing that we've been working on is water. We have some folks across the street that we work pretty closely with in the tents, living in the tents, and they've been for quite some time getting their water from a spigot, a faucet that's part of the SRO apartments, and they recently put a lock on it, and that's been it's that particular corner of folks living there. It's really affected them greatly, and in a time when it was like high 90s, 100 degrees, suddenly there's no water, and yeah, and so kind of what we've been doing over the years, and also with this kind of the water with the lock on it now, we have a faucet right in front of the entrance, and so we always help if people need water living in the tents and outside, both across the street and this right outside the door. If they need water from that faucet, folks are always you can just come and use it. And so, yeah, it's kind of like, I guess if we, if anyone can extend in any way with what you have, then we can do what we can do is kind of I guess the mindset. And so, yeah, with that also posed like the water access to that, because we close at 6 p.m. It's not always accessible, and we after COVID closed during the weekend, and so we basically got some like big like water barrels, and it's basically like water reservoirs, and then across the street there's like the city restrooms, like the big green city restrooms, and inside there it's connected to a pipe with a water source, so you could fill it up from there. And that's also because like water's so heavy. That's also for folks, and some of them are elderly folks, to get that water. And we also bought a cart to get that across the street. It's not easy. So yeah, right now what's in the works is how do we have a community controlled water infrastructure in Skid Row. Is kind of, we're working on that with the community. And so, yeah, when I think of human rights, I think of water, because without water, there's like, it's fundamental to life. And so, yeah, that's kind of, in a gist, how we do things. We do what we can do. And, with that comes conflict, comes exhaustion, comes, with all those things also comes lessons, and you learn, comes new ways to do things, new modalities that you learn, and kind of in a very general level. I mean, kind of, I think I'm being a bit general, but I guess that's a response to that.
Yeah, thank you, Danny. Thank you for also kind of painting a picture of where you are in your neighborhood. And absolutely, you shared so many different human rights issues and concerns, but it's important to see kind of, again, contextualizing right now the one that you're focusing on and how you're showing up for your neighborhood. And as we can hear both from Lynna's experience and Danny's experience, it's being very involved in the community, right? But also having to make those changes related to safety, or making changes kind of responding to what the community needs. And those are the different ways that human rights show up in businesses, whether we want to acknowledge them or not. And both of you have done, with your businesses, have done and actually made an effort to try to impact those human rights issues that are coming up. But just to share a little bit more about why businesses should care about human rights. Well, there's lots of things from a profitability perspective that it could help, especially when we're supporting the immediate community. It can improve stakeholder relations and the confidence that stakeholders have in us. So thinking about stakeholders being either business partners, other folks that you do business with, but also your community members, right? Whether it's the pharmacy next door or helping the folks across the street who are living, who are experiencing homelessness. It's also going to improve employee retention, their motivation, keeping them going, but help with recruitment of employees as well. And especially when you are caring, like with Lynna sharing around COVID, kind of the challenges with the members going out into the community and working in the field, and with AAPI hate being so strong, kind of showing up and recognizing that is helping our employees feel that motivation to keep going. It also enhances our corporate kind of reputation or the brand image. If you're known as that kind of shop in the neighborhood that you can go get water at, right? When it's 100 degrees outside. And that means that it's also going to help foster more sustainable business relationships, not only with the community, but with subcontractors, suppliers, with governments, with business partners, trade unions, other folks that we're doing businesses with. So it's definitely in the favor of businesses to care about human rights and especially care about what's happening in our community. And we'll get to hear a little bit more from Lynna and Danny soon about doing this work in their own communities.
Thanks. Sorry, I had to unmute. So in 2011, this kind of unprecedented move happened where the whole Human Rights Council unanimously agreed on these guiding principles on human rights and business. And so there's three kind of facets that they agreed on, right? So that yes, states, so like countries and governments have an obligation to respect and protect and fulfill human rights and fundamental freedom. So it reaffirmed that states do have an obligation to upholding human rights, but it also affirmed and kind of clarified the position of businesses. So for decades, there had been a building conversation around business responsibility to human rights. And these guiding principles said, yes, businesses absolutely have just as large, if not an equal, responsibility to protecting the human rights, not only of their employees, but also the communities that they touch. So we know in different contexts, like Danny, you were describing, businesses, and Lynna, like businesses have like an immediate and kind of effusive impact on their communities. And if you have large corporations overseas, that impact might look different. It might be, a larger scale. So we can't leave out that community impact is a huge aspect. So these guiding principles affirm that and also set in place remedies, right? So like these mechanisms that can remedy disputes. So it did also kind of lend a voice to workers who can say, this company or this business adversely affected my human rights and had an adverse impact on me. And so now there are mechanisms for them to lodge disputes. And so these are powerful guiding principles, and it was important because it affirmed this kind of conversation that was up in the air. And now it's, yes, businesses absolutely play a really big role. And so we have another check-in for our panelists. So what were some key moments when you realized that, your business had an impact on your community? And then how did you what actions did you take? What conversations drove you to start to intentionally shape that impact? And also, who were your allies, right? Because we can never do this work alone. And allies are really key, to not standing alone in this really important work.
Maybe should I go first since you? Okay, let me let's see. When did you? Okay. I mean, like, when did you realize the impact your businesses had on your community? You know what, like, kind of what comes to mind is I mean, it doesn't sound so grand or anything, but it's like all those little conversations or just kind of the heart-to-heart connections you have with folks, where, you know, you exchange thank yous and how much I appreciate you. And they could be done, you know, in a more private kind of one-on-one thing, a text, you get a text, or you feel so compelled to text someone, or you see kind of amongst your community members or your employees where there's gratitude being exchanged. I mean, if I have some kind of measurement for, you know, success or anything, that I think, yeah, for me, that's what comes to mind. And I think that, you know, to have that, there's got to be the precursor of having like a environment where you feel safe enough, where you can kind of share your heart and be vulnerable. And so, yeah, it's all those little exchanges that happens that we see a lot here. I guess we're blessed and fortunate that we see a lot of here. Kind of just the open-heartedness. You know, thank you so much. And how did you start to intentionally shape that impact? Okay, when I read that question, what comes to mind is Paulo Freire pedagogy of the oppressed, where student and teacher is the education model of like just depositing an information to you, to the student, and they're just receiving, where the teacher and student, it's one and the same. One affects the other. You both learn and are transformed through the process. Yeah, and I also recently rewatched Grace Lee Boggs' American Revolutionary, where they talk about Detroit summer, where they get students or youth to come and build gardens and do projects for in the city, and it's kind of like, and then one guy was asking, what this is just a poster, where's the like movement, or where's the, you know, and it's like is the being part of that process, doing it is transformative, and the people, those are the will be the people, the leaders, the future leaders, and having those questions, sitting with it, contemplating those kind of practices, where we inform one another, share our insights, like that's kind of, yeah, I guess that's what comes to mind. We like are kind of, there's like, we, in a way, we don't really know where we're headed, but we're headed somewhere, and every day is kind of like an emergent process. And that's also kind of like, I guess, the beautiful mystery of it, and that we hold each other safe through the process, and hear one another. And so like what you shared with the aspire in the beginning, that's definitely kind of, I think that the spirit of that is cornerstone to how we, you know, like how we do stuff here. We all have the trust that the inner wisdom in one another. And who helped the allies, when I heard the land acknowledgement, I have to say, I'm a second generation Korean American, born in '84. My parents immigrated here, but for me, so much it's Black people, the Black community, that's really helped me to find my place, and understand identity really here in America, and in Skid Row, and kind of being here since I was 9. Like, I guess it's allies, family, and yeah, I don't know. That's the just kind of, you know, because so much of me personally is like, I'm this Korean dude, and and I inherited the store. And there has been, from the '92 uprising, there's the kind of the relationship in the past, conflict is the word that you hear often, with the Black and Korean community, and so yeah. But when I think of my uncles and aunties and big brothers and sisters, like my Black family, yes, like it really, it's just, yeah, I guess that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Danny. And I want to just ask, because you talk a lot about we, like we hear and get the thank yous, and it's, so when you're referring to we as part of your business, are you referring to your Black family and allies, your parents? Are you referring to your employees? Are you referring to your community members, like the regulars at the store? Who do you kind of think about as makes up your community, and when you think about as we?
I guess like the first word that came to mind is like the oppressed, but then after that, kind of what the next thought that came up is like, we see, I see you and you see me and we see each other. So, it could be anybody really. When I say we, like that we see each other's heart. I mean, it could be your like all life, I guess, a lot of life, and seeing the ecology of it, few humans and in this planet, like that. We're all kin. I heard that we're kin in the land acknowledgement. We're all kin and relatives. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, and really having an intentional impact also in keeping that community, right? And you talk about how it's important it's been since you've come here. So I appreciate you sharing that. Lynna, what about you? Let's hear from you. When did you
So
realize?
I think similar to Danny, I think when we realized that we were making an impact on the community was getting, those little compliments, or, thank you for providing those services. We couldn't have gone through this appointment without you, or, and then sometimes we get the individual patients reaching out to us and saying, thank you for, sending an interpreter, or thank you for helping my mom or dad. We get a lot of those because we work with a lot of, elderly or individuals, or where, here in California, children are not allowed to interpret for their parents. And so, they have to depend and rely on someone that's essentially a stranger to come in and learn about their business, and, and be an advocate for, their mother or father or themselves, right? Because we work with a lot of hospitals, and a lot of those are cases where, if you don't know the healthcare system, you don't know the medical terminology, how do you advocate for yourself? And I mean, that's where we realize that we have a huge impact on what we do, and our services really matter. And so, to intentionally shape that, of course, we've implemented training, and we provide continuing education and other kind of training opportunities for our subcontractors who go out into the community and interpret. And so, I teach those classes. I teach on, cultural competencies and sensitivity, and, understanding that just because we share a same bond being from, one country and speaking the same language, we don't share the same culture, right? Culture change is different. That is the lived experiences for people. And, to understand the cultural differences makes a huge impact when you go in there and, advocate for the patient, because, the doctor may speak the same language or know something about the culture, but they don't understand the individual, where the person is coming from, the whole person. So, I think it's important that we provide, opportunities for people who provide these services to, gain a whole understanding of what they're really doing matters, and that, the impact that they do have it's not just a job they're doing. They're providing something that is essentially, making the individual feel like a real human being, right? Because sometimes when you can't speak a language or you don't understand what's going on, you can be dehumanized. And that's, where human rights comes in, is that we help individuals feel like a human being, and that they are getting the services that they deserve, not, because they need it, but they deserve this. This is their right to have health care and, access to the best professionals out there to help them, deal with whatever's going on with them, right? And so I think that's what we do, is, ensuring that every human being out there gets the services they need, regardless of what language they speak, or, where they come from, or, their social, economical, background, or, gender, whatever. And so I think that's what we do, and that's the impact that we have. And of course, the allies are the people who go out there and provide these services, right? They're the people who are using their voice to speak up for individuals that literally don't have a voice because they can't speak the language, right? And then, agencies that realize that the importance of having, an interpreter come in and help an individual navigate the services. I think those are our allies. I mean, if people in those agencies didn't realize that they needed, someone to help, be the bridge and be the conduit, bridge that gap, then, we would have much more people out there not getting the services they need and deserve, right?
Thank you, Lynna. And I appreciate you sharing how language, right? The right to language and communication is a human right that you're providing with your services, and really helping people feel like humans and not feel dehumanized for not having the same communication and the language. And I appreciate both of you also sharing how you realize the impact when you do have folks kind of relaying back to you and saying, thank you, like this really is so meaningful. And the text or the people kind of communicating to you, thank you for helping my mom or dad. And I think that just displays the importance of having a beloved community, or why we should really think about as not just holding a business or a part of a community, but really thinking about cultivating a beloved community.
Yeah, and before we kind of deepen that conversation, I'm just reflecting on how it sounds like both of your businesses are really responding to the risks of your clients, right? Like all of the many intersectional, interlinked risks that they are experiencing. And what I'm seeing is that businesses can also act as like a protective factor, right? And in protecting their human rights. And I think that's so powerful, right? Because we talk about, all the many services and individuals who can kind of intervene in the risks that populations face, but businesses as an entity can also act as a way to protect. And I just think that's so powerful. And so, yeah, we did want to turn to beloved community as a culmination and a process of all the relationships and really radical practices that are made. And Danny, what you're saying of this spirit of like heartfelt inclusion, right? And the spirit of compassion. And, Dr. King popularized and deepened kind of exploration of this term, and Bell Hooks did, and Coretta Scott King has this wonderful language where she puts beloved community as a state of heart and mind, and it's a spirit of hope and goodwill. And so we kind of wanted to to bring us to that level of, you know, like how do we react to all the like boundaries and barriers and kind of act as one? And I love what y'all were saying about it's the feedback, right, that matters. It's like you have to create that that open-ended communication where you're saying, yeah, we're here and you're here, and we're going to work kind of together as one. I think that's really powerful in building beloved community. And I think we have some questions around that, but if either of you wanted to talk about what beloved community means to you, how that resonates, what your perspectives are on building that. And I know, Danny, you have a connection to this term, and we'd love to hear about it. And Lynna, you unmuted, go ahead.
Well, I would say, you know, I think as, you know, members of any community, you know, it's important to play a role in it, right? And the best kind of role to play in your community is one that is full of compassion. And, you know, I think in the last couple of years, we've seen that being tested, right? The compassion towards one another and caring for one another and not being selfish, and, you know, and stepping up when people are not being defended or being attacked. And I think, you know, as a human being, you know, you think that we should treat each other that way. And it's funny because, you know, I told many people this, you know, I came back, I just went to Spain for a couple of weeks, and I came back with a whole new perspective on life and people. And, you know, I told my wife, I don't want to go back to the United States because people don't care about each other. And because it's just like the 2 weeks we spent in Spain, it proves to you that people can be caring and people can, you know, be compassionate and just be genuinely concerned about people and do things that without, you know, without any motive or wanting anything in return, right? So it's possible. It's possible to be in a community where, you know, people treat each other as normal human beings and do not see each other as, you know, competition or, you know, whatever it may be. So, you know, for me, you know, we need to move to a point where, you know, we treat each other just with respect. And I think we've lost that, and it's sad. It's really, really sad.
Yeah, that's that kind of hits, because when you see the world in that way, I mean, it makes me think of like the high rates of suicide, when the suffering, the practice of like, you can't get trapped in your suffering, and that's all you see, and then we decide to end our life. And there's so much on a structural level where that produces those conditions where it produces those behaviors in people and individuals thinking that it's an individual fault. And then like with substance abuse, drugs, and the addiction, and seeking their relief from so much of the pain, the suffering. Yeah, so I mean, beloved community, I think is like all of that, you know, it's like not like this perfect idealized world. I see it as a practice. When I heard that, I like Mr. Oh, okay. I cut out this. I was wondering if I still had it in my drawer, because I like Mr. Rogers, and there was this quote that I really liked that he said, and I printed it out and cut it out a couple years ago, and it's still here. A neighborhood was a place where at times that you felt worried, scared, unsafe, it would take care of you, provide understanding, safety. That's what it is to us. The neighborhood is not a fantasy place where all these people got together and everything was happily ever after. when you have different people together with diverse opinions, you have conflict, real conflict. So yeah, I think of the practice of, I mean, nonviolent communication. The Marshall Rosenberg is a pretty popular model and book that, you know, I think it should be taught in like public school. What do we do with this anger that we feel, and how do we, you know, how do we process it? Anger, these emotions are a part of life. To be angry is not bad, you know, and so when we have, you know, in a neighborhood where there's more resources and healthy outlets, green spaces, etc., I think there's more there's more of the access to be able to kind of understand strong emotions. Yeah, that's really important because we see, you know, a lot of the violence, and so yeah, kind of that's in a I guess my response to the beloved community as a practice, as a life practice.
Yeah, thank you, Danny, and thank you for sharing that quote, and Lynna also for pointing out the challenges we're experiencing kind of nationwide, internationally, around cultivating a beloved community or believing in this, like it is a utopian society, right? But Danny, you shared things that we can have to actualize it. And I think that might answer one of the audience questions around how do we, what do we need to rebuild respect in this country a little bit, but we do have some questions from the live audiences, and I'm going to kind of pose them to either Lynna or Danny to briefly respond to. So one is just around, Lynna, especially you mentioned, like you've made this active decision since COVID and since anti-AAPI hate in the last couple of years of closing your doors, locking your doors, or ending hours early. So how has your profitability suffered as a result of having to close early, if at all?
I don't think the closing early affected profitability. I think it's more of the fact that COVID happened, right? People were afraid to go out and get services, and a lot of people's health suffered, not only physical health, but mental health, right? And that's the services we provide, was giving people the opportunity to get those services, and that has affected profitability because a lot of people are still scared to go out, or you know, or don't want to risk their health, or you know, all that, you know, other stuff. And we've lost, and like I was telling someone earlier, we lost a lot of interpreters and subcontractors because of COVID, because we weren't providing services, so they all got other jobs, other full-time jobs that may not be as satisfying, and you know, it's not giving back to the community. And so that also affects our profitability, because the inability to, you know, go out there and do stuff. And I think a lot of us have suffered because of COVID, and you know, we are bouncing back, but you know, we're not where we were 3 years ago, and who knows if we will ever be back where we were 3 years ago, because things have changed, right? A lot of services are now being utilized via phone and video, and people are cutting costs too because they have lost money, and so they're using, you know, cheaper interpreters, and the services are not the same, right? And there is something to be said about face to face, and so that's, you know, it's hard, and to navigate that is, you know, difficult to, you know, we have this new normal that we must navigate, and hopefully, you know, in the future things change and we go back to that face-to-face connection, because when you provide services, you need to be face-to-face, and this video stuff doesn't, you know, it works, but it's not the same, and it's, you know, the connections are missing. And I saw that question about how do we get back, you know, build the respectability. I think we need back to our human connections. And you know, we've been living in a bubble of this world of video, and you know, and we're not connecting with one another anymore, and we're all with this technology based, and it's hard. I mean, it was nice when, you know, people could come and go to our offices and we could connect with them. And but you know, with uncertainty, you have to, you know, you have to make changes, and you lose that whole human nature and humanity.
Yeah, thank you, Lynna, for sharing that, because especially with small businesses, of course, you're working so much in the community. So when you lose that bit of connection in your experience, it's really impacted more than just, you know, profitability. It's impacted your kind of how much you're able to impact the community as well. And if you want to quickly also address this question, Lynna, if this is relevant to your small business, about how does age discrimination impact your business revenue, if at all, when choosing to hire younger people can often cost less than seasoned professionals, especially given the fact that during COVID, you did lose a lot of your employees.
Well, ironically, we're the opposite. We like people with more experience, and tend to hire people who are, you know, older or have retired. A lot of our interpreters were professionals in their own country, right? Doctors, lawyers, engineers. So coming here, that speaks a whole nother issue, where they can't get their professions back, right? Because they can't get their medical license or their law degree, or, you know, or pass the bar without going back to school. So, you know, often a lot of the people that work for us or work with us are older. And so the younger people have less experience. So we're less likely to bring them on as, you know, subcontractors. But because, you know, we are facing it, you know, like I said, we provide training, so we put them through the training, and, you know, at least we know that they have some experience and some training under their belt if we bring them aboard. But it's ironic, we bring in the older people and the people who have retired, or this is their second or third career, because they have the experience and they have the knowledge, and that, you know, it actually works better. Of course, they're going to charge more because of their experience, but, you know, my mother has always instilled that it's better to have the best people, and cut our costs and cut our profitability and provide the best services, than have, you know, the less experienced person out there handling something and then impacting the person's, you know, experience, or their, you know, their treatment or their care, or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that too, because that's another way that you're helping immigrants and the diaspora experience, right? With really valuing the experiences that people have, and if they can't use kind of the other skills that they can rely on. So thank you, Lynna, for answering those questions. I've got a couple of questions that I think I'd like to pose to Danny from the live audience. So one is around municipalities. And this person also says, Danny, your work is so admirable. So thank you for that. So how has local municipalities and representatives helped or not helped your business? Do you feel like government agencies are listening to your needs and you have access to them? And this is especially relevant, Danny, for you, because folks are also curious about the differences between Black and Korean community members, and if there's any gang activities or ongoing conflicts that are happening currently in your community. So just generally, do you have access to government agencies and municipalities and representatives helping you? And what about the conflict, if any conflict exists within the Black and Korean communities?
With the relationship with the city or county, trying to think. I mean, we have relationships. I'm trying to think if there's any formal ones, but just on a personal level, and also just like the community. There's folks who are just, we're friends, and also work in the government. So, I mean, in that way, we're all kind of intertwined, interconnected, like in doing this work of like transformation and healing. Yeah, I mean, I've been in. I mean, we have, yeah, there's a lot of different partnerships that we have. Like, for example, like working with like the Skid Row Cooling Center. That's like, I think that's city funded. And so, I mean, it's kind of, maybe I'll have a better answer if I sit with it more, but like these folks that we're in relation with, mentors, they're folks that have worked in the city for a long time. And so I wish, yeah, I can, if there's a more specific way I can answer that question, if there's a specific kind of like wanting to hear something more specifically, I would try to answer. And the second part, the conflict, the Black Korean conflict. I mean, yeah, I mean, as far as gangs go, I think that like, I mean, there are like, you know, folks who are affiliated here, but as far as, I mean, I don't think that's a big kind of, as far as like the conflicts that happen in running the business goes, we haven't had much like conflicts with that. Yeah, I think what comes to mind, like unhoused people, the mental instability, not just mental instability, but like the nature of the unstable nature of things here is, you know, it causes the behaviors and how we can be together in harmony, and not in like a policing way, punitive way. And that's an ongoing thing, you know, because as a business, like you have resources in an area where people are there's so much need. And so I guess just a trail of thought, like one thing that's like we have a credit system, and I think that's like a really good practice because it's less of, it's more about like building trust. That yeah, we've had it for decades. Like a credit system. So yeah, I'm not sure. I feel like maybe I'll stop there. Yeah, I mean, conflicts exist all the time, and also it's an opportunity for us to kind of, you know, without conflict, there's the transformation. Would it be possible? And so, yeah, I guess in the larger scale, the structural thing that continues to produce this is it's an ongoing challenge, you know. And I guess speaking to the elder, I don't know if I'm taking up too much time, but we were talking about like the seniors and elders and working with just the ageism. The work that, you know, how do we live well, and also like how do we die well, right? But when you live a life of so much injustice, so much tragedy, so much struggle, suffering, and then you just in an illness and you die, that is so tragic, you know. And like, you know, that's something like, what do we do? The karma of that, the intergenerational trauma, like, and so yeah, that's a big concern, like, because we're not going to stop that overnight, and it's going to continue happening. Loneliness, economic hardship, not wanting to be a burden on anyone, the lack of the social network, safety network, like, and so if we can do anything is yeah, the social health, like how do you still, when you transition, leave with, you're human, the human, right? Like human being, like nothing can take that away from you, your humanity, not what the world does to you, nothing. And, the aspiration is that we can hold on to that belief and not, you see so much, we start believing otherwise. And so it's my rambling.
Thank you, Danny. You wrapped it up well. So I think in answering the question of, do you have access to the municipalities and local government and kind of city and local officials? You said yes, and you're building partnerships, but also you named a lot of different types of conflicts and issues that are systemic, that have to do with not just, we think about with Skid Row and Black and Korean conflict. It's much more broader than that, where you're saying it has to do with the instability that folks are going through, but using kind of conflict to create that harmony in community and seeing it as a positive way of reflecting on community. So thank you for sharing that in your experience. And we want to just wrap up with having us kind of think about what is the role that we can play or you can play as small business owners, right? We heard from Danny Park and Lynna Doe about the ways that they're impacting the people who they're contracting, right? The subcontractors, the immediate community, but also this larger kind of societal impact that they're having. So we want you to really think about your spheres of influence. Where can you make an impact? And specifically when we're talking about human rights and all of these kind of complicated societal issues that small businesses are set up to have an impact on. And one first place to start might be to just do a temperature check of your organization. So we have this survey that you can take as an organization, share with your staff to fill out and reach out to UHRI. You reach out to us and we're happy to share the results. So you can start that you can use that as a place to start having dialogue around human rights and the impact that your small business is making and having. And we just want to leave you with some more thoughts to think about and really just take from the experiences that Danny and Lynna shared with us today about their small businesses and how we can all have an impact, especially as small businesses in the community. So Abigail, I'll pass it on to you to kind of close us out today.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for all your sharing. So we want to leave for folks who are here and also who get an opportunity to view this webinar to really think of all of the actionable steps you can take no matter what role you're in, right? As a leader, a consultant, a community member, to either reach out to your community, or if you're a community member, reach out to your local businesses. How can you promote human rights for a sustainable world, right? And I heard just like so many incredible themes and words come out of this. I wish I could summarize them all, but I'm leaving with, that we mentality, Danny, that you talked about. Lynna, if you're not around, how will you help your community? I'm leaving with some really powerful takeaways and conflict as an opportunity, right? Because if we, transformation does happen through conflict, right? Through multi-perspectives, right? And so we'll continue this conversation next Friday on the 28th. I don't know if that's next Friday. It's coming up for our mental health challenges for AAPI small business owners. We'll offer some tools for making time for self-care and mindful self-compassion while managing the stress of discrimination and also while managing a business. And we also have a 4-part cultural sensitivity dialogue series, which is a really interactive series where we're recruiting small business leaders, consultants, community members to come together and have really involved conversations together, dialogues together around the roles that we can play in liberation and a sustainable world.
So thank you, everyone. With that, we'll say thank you to Danny Park and Lynna Doe for sharing your experiences. And thank you, everybody, for taking away from this and learning from this.